Hello, everyone. This video is all about the scalenes, and the scalenes are on page 246 in your book. There are 3 scalene muscles: anterior, middle, and posterior scalenes. The scalenes are a lot like piriformis in that they have a nerve and nerve branches directly in between the anterior and middle scalenes. So very much like piriformis, if the scalene muscles are hypertonic, they could potentially put pressure on this nerve root and cause numbness and tingling all the way down the arm. So we're going to take a look at that as well as the actions of scalenes right now. We do the screen share, and then we go to the book. And here we are. So the scalenes, anterior, middle, and posterior scalene, attach to the first and second rib and the cervical vertebrae. In between anterior and middle scalene is the brachial plexus and the subclavian artery. So this is a neurovascular bundle, okay? And if the anterior and middle scalenes are hypertonic or tight, they can compress this neurovascular bundle and cause numbness and tingling and paresthesia, which is pins and needles, feelings all the way down into the hands. Now, of course, being massage therapists, we work with muscles all the time. So if these are tight and they are compressing these structures, we can potentially help relax these muscles and take the pressure off of those structures. How wonderful is that? I think it's great. And I do see this quite a bit, as a matter of fact. All right, so let's talk about the origin and the insertion. Let's make this small so I can advance the screen. Here we are. So this is the action for all of the scalenes. And of course, I don't really like it when they do that, but that's okay. Anterior scalene originates on the transverse processes of the 3rd through the 6th cervical vertebrae. So TPs C3 through 6. If you like to abbreviate or if you like to write this stuff down in a different way, if you're visually oriented, it'd be TPs, transverse processes, TPs, C for cervical vertebrae, 3 through 6. That is how I remembered these when I was in school, because this was much easier for me to remember than transverse processes of 3rd through 6th cervical vertebrae. Okay? Just another one of those little hints for you. This one inserts on the first rib, and the first rib is entirely covered by muscle, by the way. It is difficult to palpate the first rib because it actually is up here and then it kind of dips down under the clavicle a little bit. So it's not really palpable, okay? Anterior scalene is, but its insertion is not. So origin, TPs, C3 through 6, insertion, first rib. Middle scalene is just posterior to that, as you saw on the previous screen. This one originates on the TPs of C2 through 7. So it's just a little bigger. TPs C2 through 7. And this one also inserts on the first rib. Just more posterior on the first rib. And remember, in between anterior and middle scalene, the brachial plexus and the subclavian artery appear. The posterior scalene is teeny tiny, and it originates on the TPs of C6 and 7 only, and inserts on the second rib. So this one is not palpable at all. Anterior middle scalene are, these are not. This is just entirely covered by other things. And it is part of the group. However, it's a minor player compared to anterior and middle scalene. Okay, so let's go to the actions then. All right, we have unilateral and bilateral actions, kind of like everything else in the neck. Unilaterally, it rotates the head and neck to the opposite side. So scalenes are contralateral rotators, just like trapezius and SCM. They rotate to the opposite side. Now, when the ribs are fixed, they laterally flex the head and neck. They're small, but they can do it. Okay, laterally flex the head and neck. Bilaterally, they're going to flex the head and neck because they are more on the anterior, right? They can also elevate the ribs during inhalation, just like SCM. So they're very similar to SCM, just a lot smaller, okay? Now, the reason this says when the ribs are fixed is because, remember, this can elevate the ribs. So if we're not elevating the ribs, if we're just sitting nice and still, then scalenes can help laterally flex. Okay. Pardon me. I'm going to stop the share for a second. So scalenes are palpable. They are palpable directly behind SCM. Okay. So if we turn our partner's head to one side and we find SCM, here is the sternal head, right? The clavicular head is posterior to that. And then scalenes are going to be posterior to the clavicular head. They remember that they are kind of low in the cervical area, C3 to through C6, C2 to 7 for origins. So we're going to be back here. So look where we are in relation to the ear. We're posterior to the ear here. That rhymed. Posterior to the ear here. And our scalenes are going to be right in here. Now, scalenes are usually pretty tender to the touch. So I always tell people if it hurts, it's a scalene, because they don't usually get worked and they are pretty tight, especially on people who have breathing issues like asthma and COPD and things like that. Or people who do a lot of elevation of the arms because you always laterally flex kind of when you elevate. People who do like yard work, people who drive skags and things like that tend to have tight scalenes. Electricians, people who do a lot of manual labor typically have tight scalenes as well. So we will be palpating these in class, but if you are trying to palpate them on yourselves, they are posterior to SCM. And honestly, if you push in here, you can potentially push in on the brachial plexus, and you'll know when you do, pardon me, because it zings down the arm. Obviously, you're going to move your hands just a little bit and not produce that nerve sensation, okay? All right, everybody.